Hi everyone. So today I'll be walking through the process of installing Runtime Fabric on Azure. In terms of the topics that I'll be covering, I'll walk you kind of through the setup of Runtime Fabric in Runtime Manager. Just going ahead and creating a new Runtime Fabric entry, and then I'll walk you through the process of setting up Azure, generating the template as well as loading the template into Azure. I won't be covering how to enable inbound traffic or kind of going into the Runtime Fabric Ops Center. I'll go ahead and save that for a different video. And then additionally, of course, this assumes that you have your Anypoint platform set up with the entitlements for Runtime Fabric, and you also have your own Azure account where you can go ahead and run the templates to instantiate the VM instances as well as all the different components needed for Runtime Fabric. Okay. So let's go ahead now and switch over to Anypoint platform. You can see here I'm already logged in. Where you're going to find the setup is under Runtime Manager. So we'll click on Runtime Manager, and then if you have the entitlements over here on the left, you'll see Runtime Fabrics. There's currently no Runtime Fabrics within my account, so what we're going to go ahead and do is click on Create Runtime Fabric, and then we'll go ahead and give it a name. So we'll call it Azure Runtime Fabric. Click on Create, and then you can see that the current status is ready for activation. So it's going to go ahead and wait now for you to run the setup on the Azure side. And then once that's up and running, it's going to go ahead and communicate back and show that the status is ready and green. Additionally, you can see here in this page, there's some additional installation steps, but I'll be walking you through that today. There are two things that you'll need from here: the Runtime Fabric installer configuration files. These are the scripts depending on where you're going to be installing Runtime Fabric, either in Azure or AWS. So you're going to want to go ahead and click on that and download that locally. And then for instructions, of course, this link is also helpful. This is the link to our documentation that walks you through the installation of Runtime Fabric on Azure, but I'll kind of show you from a demo standpoint how to go ahead and set this up. Okay. And then lastly, you also need this activation data string later on when you are in Azure and you're setting up the different components. Okay, so the first thing we want to go ahead and do is once we've set this up in Runtime Manager, is that we're going to go ahead and create a script, and the script is gonna take your Mule license key and run that against a script that will generate the template necessary to deploy the instances that you need within Azure. It's going to give you two different scripts. It's going to give you one for development environment and then also one for production environment. So let's go ahead and do that first, setting up the script and the license key. Okay. So over on here, I've gone ahead already and unzipped the installation script and opened that up. And in here, there are a couple folders. There's one for Amazon, right? This has the scripts if you want to go ahead and install this in Amazon, but we're going to go ahead and run this today in Azure. So in the Azure folder, what we're going to go ahead and do is create a new file. And this file, we're going to go ahead and call it script.sh. Okay. And in this script from the documentation, we're going to go ahead and paste in the following strings into this file. Okay, we're going to go ahead and save that, and then additionally you want to make sure that you have your license key from support for your Mule runtimes. This is the same license that you run against the Mule runtime when you install it. With this file, we're going to go ahead and open up the documentation first and copy the string. So we need this one for Mac. There's also one for Linux here. And what we're going to go ahead and do is open up a terminal window and make sure we're in the same directory as the license file. You can see there's the license file. And we're going to run that command against that license file, and it's going to generate the base64 encoded string of that file. And what we need to do with this string that was generated is we actually need to take this and paste this into that file that we just created. So we'll paste that. You can see here I've pasted that between the two single quotations. So that's going to be the Runtime Fabric Mule license. And it's going to take this string and then run that against the generate templates script. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this file and we'll close it for now. And then back over in my terminal window, you can see I'm in the same directory as the installation script for Azure here. What we want to make sure we do first is go ahead and change the permissions for that script file so we can actually run it. And then let's go ahead and run it now. And when we run it, what's going to happen in the background, it's going to go ahead and take that, that script that we just created, use the templates, and generate 2 JSON files. So you can see here, these 2 JSON files are essentially the instructions for Azure to understand how many instances to spin up and what other components are necessary to run Azure, okay? Or run Runtime Fabric, okay? So there's one for development, one for production. Today we're just gonna go ahead and run the one for development because we only want to spin up a couple instances, okay? Okay, so to kind of recap, we've set up Runtime Fabric in Anypoint platform and it's waiting for us to set up the Azure side. And then from a template standpoint, we've run a script that has the base64 encoded string over license file to generate 2 different templates, one for development, one for production. So let's go ahead now and switch over to Azure. And what we're going to do is take that template file and use that and run that in Azure to go ahead and deploy the component that we need for Runtime Fabric. Okay. So within Azure, we're going to go ahead and click on Create a Resource over here in the top left, and we're going to search for template. And the first item here in the drop down here is template deployment. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And then from here, we'll click on Create and then build your own template in the editor. So from this window, this edit template, we'll go ahead and load a file. And let's go ahead and drill into the installation script and load up the JSON file that describes the development environment. So if we click on this one, arm template-dev.json, and click on open, it's going to go ahead and load that file and show you all the different components that are needed for Runtime Fabric within Azure. So from here, we can go ahead and click on save. And then we're going to go ahead and select a couple things. So for subscription, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as pay as you go. For the resource group, I'm going to go ahead and select MuleSoft. You can also create a new one and tie it specifically to Runtime Fabric. And then location, I've set that to South Central US. And then for this screen under the settings, there's a couple fields that we need. So the first thing we need to get is the activation data string here. We're going to go ahead and copy that and paste that into the Anypoint activation data field. And then we also need to get a public key. So what the public key is your SSH public key that allows you to SSH into your instances that you deploy. So if you haven't done this before, you'll have to run a couple commands from your terminal window to go ahead and generate this public key. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do is run the command ssh-keygen-0. And this is going to go ahead and generate a RSA key pair and save this into a specific folder. We can go ahead and leave it as the default folder. And I already have one, so I'll go ahead and create a new one here. And it's going to ask me for a passphrase, so I'll go ahead and type that in. And then when it generates that, that's going to go ahead and get stored into that folder locally. And then in order to get the public key that you need, you'll go ahead and do a cat to that specific file, right? The id_rsa.public file. And that's going to give you your RSA key. So from here, we can go ahead and copy this string and paste that into that specific field. And then everything else we can leave default, right? We can change the controller instance type or the worker instance size, but since this is development, I'm going to go ahead and leave those the default values here. And then lastly, I'm going to go ahead and click on agree to the terms and conditions and then click on purchase. And once you click on that, it's going to go ahead and start the deployment. So over here on the right, you can see that the deployment is currently in process. Each of these components are now being spun up and configured based off of that template. So we'll give this a couple minutes to run through, and then once I return, we can go ahead and look at it communicating back to Runtime Fabric within the Runtime Manager. Okay, so we started this about 5:15 p.m. It's about 5:36 now. It's taken about 15 minutes to actually spin, actually 20 minutes to spin all the different components up and get that registered. So if you hit refresh a couple times, you can see that it'll show you the status of the different components, whether they've been created or they're currently still being spun up. Additionally, we can come over to resource groups and look at the specific resource group. We can see all the different components, how long it took to spin up each component. So it's about 21 minutes. And then if we switch over to, and then you can see now there's an alert letting me know that deployment has succeeded for that specific template. If we come back over to the Runtime Fabric section within Runtime Fabric, you can see now that it's showing active. It's going to show you how many vCores and how much memory you have available. And then in here, we're going to want to go ahead now and assign this to specific environments. So let's go ahead and assign this production for now. You can also add it to specific business groups. But once we apply that allocation, it's going to go ahead and configure that and tie this Runtime Fabric environment to the production environment. And then additionally, we can go ahead and enable inbound traffic. But I'm going to go ahead and save that for another video. This video kind of just is a walkthrough to show you how to set up the template, and run that template within Azure, and then have that registered against the Runtime Fabric and Runtime Manager within the Anypoint platform. But that's it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment or reach out. I'm always happy to help.